No, we have more pea soup. Yeah, okay. Well, people read the new description. I'll eat a last amount of my soup. I guess I should not have started the stream because I still have soup. I'm hot. How can it be hot when it is 17 degrees here? Yeah, assuming people read the description. These are the vectors of vectors, rather vectors of pointers to vectors in the FlatCreateInfo. And theoretically, characteristic ranges Let me finish the last part of my soup. Okay. So theoretically, during the initialization, pipeline characteristic ranges can add a new vector to this vector, so a new vector pointer. And theoretically, they can run in parallel, so they could do this concurrently. And therefore, we need a mutex, I think. Now, it's currently not happening because if we go to the, let's say, DPS pipeline factory. multiplex. Here's the task. Start, initialize, initialized. That's a different kind of initialize. Initialized we call I think we just run it here. Characteristics, the M characteristics is all the characteristic tasks. And they're just being started here using a low priority queue. So they definitely run in parallel, even from the beginning. So in order to know what this run is doing, well, run is just starting it from the thread pool, so a different thread starts running these tasks. And the type of those tasks are derived from characteristic range. So I can't go through that from here. I have to look at window.h, where that is defined. So here's the task that is derived from it. And it starts with the first state, it's called the texture test pipeline characteristic range initialize. And the first thing it does is calling add with all the vectors, pointers to all the vectors that it is going to fill on the FlatCreateInfo. The FlatCreateInfo of this object is merely a pointer to the actual FlatCreateInfo. We just saw that being set. Here it sets it. It sets FlatCreateInfo pointer of the characteristic, and then it runs it. So each characteristic gets the same pointer, namely the FlatCreateInfo of the pipeline factory object. And yeah, therefore all the add functions, of the FlatCreateInfo. This is the FlatCreateInfo. Hello, Pasi. Must be thread safe. And what they do is, well, just depending on what you pass, if you pass a vector of this type or a pointer to a vector of this type, then you get this add. So every vector has its own type, so I just could use add everywhere. Saini Bread, thank you. And I don't know if you're here from the very start of the stream. I'm kind of trying very hard to make it understandable. But then if you miss the first 5 minutes, it's a lost cause again. I wrote something in the description though, at the top, the first paragraph of the description below the video is describing the code that I'm working on. Okay, so we have multiple threads that concurrently execute multiple so-called characteristic range tasks, which call add possibly the same function. and therefore then possibly concurrently calling pushback on the same vector. And that's of course not thread safe. So I have to fix that. And that's the first thing that I'm going to do. Now I made a library. It's part of my C++ project base code. So I have like a lot of files written in the last 10 to 20 years that support writing difficult and complex C++ programs. This definitely belongs to that. Namely, the way that I'm making the thread safe is wrapping this type into a template that makes it thread safe. How does that work? Well, we begin with creating that type. So I'm going to say using, and well, let's just use it, call it after the variable with the underscore t after it for the type. And then it is AI thread saves the namespace wrapper, and then the type that I want to make thread safe, like that. And then we have to follow that with AI thread safe policy, also a namespace, and then the type of mutex that I want to use. So read-write mutex, or maybe even no mutex at all, but one that in debug mode checks that that it is correct that you did not use a mutex. In this case, I know I need a mutex, and I'm going to use a simple mutex. So that is called primitive, I think. And I have to also pass the type of the mutex that I want to use, and I'm just going to use a standard library mutex. And then we close the wrapper. And that's it. And then now this type exists of this type plus a mutex. So it's like a pair. The difference, however, is that you cannot access either element. You have no first and second to access it. So it's thread safe because you cannot even access it. Haha. Okay, now I'm going to use this as type instead of that. And well, I have to do that with everything, and then we are done. Then it is thread safe. That is, it won't compile until I fix my code, and as soon as it compiles again, it will be thread safe. That means I will need to lock this mutex in order to access the underlying vector. Well, probably need to include that. Let's say include thread safe. I think it is stored in its own directory. Isn't it horrible that I don't know that? I can put my cursor on wrapper and then jump to it. Yeah, indeed. Thread safe.ai thread safe. Twice thread safe. But who is counting? Okay, well, I'll have to do that for all of them, I think, because all of them are being added to concurrently by other characteristic tasks. The wrapper, and then we get that type, and then we follow it up with simple mutex, And then I have to delete this and replace it with a new type, the thread safe type. And then do that again for this one. Type is AI wrapper, and then the type you want to hide. And I use a mutex for everything. Using, and the next one, underscore t equals rapid. And we want to allocate something of this type, and we want to use a simple mutex. Okay. Now it starts to get boring. So you wonder, couldn't I have done this faster using some Vim magic? And I could have, I think. Now I'm halfway. I don't think that it is faster if I try that. Here. Primitive mutex. Okay. And then need to leave that. Put that type there. Yeah, there's something else. This is just a pointer, a single pointer. It's not a vector. So I don't want two different threads to be writing to this and then one overriding the other value. That would be wrong anyway. So I don't think this needs to be thread safe. This one does, however. Oh well, let's move it up. It's probably not logical, but it is looking better. Because this is still a vector of vector pointers. So we treat it exactly the same. Wrapped it. We wrap the actual vector of vector pointers together with a mutex. Okay, now if I start to compile this, and of course nothing works anymore because you cannot access it. But hey, at least that should show us that we get lots of compile errors in all my add functions. For example, this add is trying to use this member object, member variable, which is now an AI thread safe wrapper. Therefore, this won't compile anymore. Well, I could show you by compiling it, but why would I? Let's fix it. What we want to do is we write to it, so that we need a write access. So I have to make from the type, and then WAT, write access type. And then I create something that I do underscore W for write access. And then we pass this thing. Creating that like this locks the mutex. And then after that we can access it through the created object using a little arrow. An arrow, like the minus and larger than. So you can see the only way I can access it is by creating this object. And creating the object locks the mutex. So I can only access it after locking the mutex. And then we return a size. Now, should I still have the mutex locked? Well, I think so, because what is being returned is used as an index into this array. So if I would unlock my mutex, like here, before executing the return, then it would be possible for another thread to push back something else, and then the size would increase. But I want to return, of course, the size that we get immediately after the pushback. So this object is not destructed before we return this. First we call size, and then size is equal to, well, the size -1 is equal to the index of where we just added this new vector pointer. And then we get here still, and then we destruct this object, and the destructor will then unlock the mutex. But I think it is important to note that the mutex must be kept locked after the pushback until we also call size. So this is the correct code. Well, except that I now have to access it like this, _w error. And then I have to do that for every usage. Here we call merge. Now it's dubious. I mean, the merge is merging everything. So there should be no characteristic tasks anymore messing with my vector at all. And we are virtually single-threaded here, so no locking is required. But my library forces you to do that. There is simply no way to access it anymore without locking the mutex. So we just have to do it. No way around it. But the merge takes a vector or vector pointers, and it's written like a template, so I did not have to duplicate the code for each of these vectors or vectors that we have, because they all look the same. Now what I can do is pass the wrapper type here and then do the locking inside this merge. Or I can do the locking before that and then just pass the vector. I'm hesitating here because I do not understand why it is being passed as a copy. This is passed by value. Why the hell is it passed by value? That makes no sense. Okay. Anyway, input list is this a vector of pointers to vectors. And what we do is we run over it and look at the size of each of the vectors that we store and add those up, because the only thing that we're going to do is concatenate all these vectors. So you make a new vector, result, and then result gets added all the vectors that are in this vector of vectors. I do a reserve before that, so we want to have an addition here. So all of this seems to be read-only. However, I use the mutex, not a read-write mutex. But why not prepare the code for once, or for the case that we want to use a read-write mutex. and use the right syntax for that. So I'm going to need a mutex before we do this to get access. And then I don't think there's any reason, I mean, again, noting that this is virtually single-threaded, so the whole mutex didn't have to be locked in the first place. So I just keep the lock until we also did this. And then it doesn't really matter if we lock it inside this function or outside it, I think. Except that if I would lock it outside this function, I have to change all the calls to merge. Not just this one, but also this one, and so on and so on. So if I do not want that, I just want to call merge. And here too, no changes of the code here. Isn't that the whole idea of merge, to avoid code duplication? So let's keep it like this. And that means that merge now gets a AI thread safe wrapper. So what we're actually passing here is an AI thread safe wrapper of a standard vector const pointers, comma, AI threads mutex, because all of the vectors look the same. They're all of that type. I do not, however, want to pass that as a by value, if at all possible. I don't think that's possible. You cannot copy a mutex, and wrapper contains a mutex. Let's see if I did this correct. Vector, open, close, and then, yeah. So no, I do not want that. I want to pass it as a const reference. Could also pass it as a reference, but yeah, I'm not going to really change the thing. It's a read-only thing, like I just said. However, now note that there is a difference between my vector, so the this one is even read-only. This one is also read-only. You can also see it because of the const here. But even this one is read-only. We're just going to read the size of it and then read it again to concatenate it into a new vector. But there is a difference between that this vector is const and that the wrapper is const. And the difference is that if the wrapper is const, then I'm not allowed anymore to take a write log. But I can still take a read log. So let's take the read log like here. Okay, let's take it like here. I'm going to have to copy the whole thing, right? That's our type now. And then we create a read access type. Except that a read access type logs, if it was a read write log, which it isn't, but if it was a read write log, then a read log would, block write logs, but not other read logs. But you would be able to convert a read log into a write log. And since it's not allowed to get a write log, because our wrapper is const, we are also not allowed to create a read access type. It seems weird, but yeah, if you have a read access type, you can convert it to a write access type. So I have to put a C in front of it. A const read access type. And a CRAD cannot be converted to a right axis type. Therefore, now we are totally safe. Okay, I'm gonna call this input list underscore R, and we have to create that from the wrapper. So this now locks mutex, or if it was a read-write lock, it would read lock the read-write lock. And then we get access to it, but only read access. We get a const pointer to the object back. So now you have an R, and then you have to, it's a pointer, so you can dereference it. And again here. And then for the rest it should work. And then we made it thread safe for all the vectors. Now let's see if this compiles. Yeah, LGL asked me how are buffers made in Vulkan. If it is in Vulkan, you have to do it yourself, yes. Well, there is of course a VK buffer, but yeah. You have to do even the memory allocation stuff yourself. Loads and loads of code. I already supported it though, so I do not have to worry about it anymore. My engine is supporting buffer stuff. Let's see. Any type name before? Ah yes, this is inside the template. When it's inside the template and it depends on the type T, and it does, the template parameter. Now you need to put type name in front of everything that is a type. The CRAD is a type, so we have to tell it that it's a type. Error using vertex input binding descriptions list type, which is a wrapper of a vector pointers. Or rather read this from right to left, so this is a vector of a pointer to const vector. Has no member named pushback, so I guess I've got the error. I've got the arrow. No, I just didn't do this. I still have to change the merge viewer here. I did all the merges now, but I still have to do all the add functions. So then we had an example anyway of how this no longer compiles unless we fix the code. So lock the mutex for write access, and then the created object can be used, and then here too. And the merge still works. And here again, I do that thing type, right axis type, that thing underscore w, m underscore, and then the member. And then here we have underscore, deleted the p, and again underscore w, and so on. Type what w underscore the thing. Probably could also automate this somehow with a macro, but on all of that code with Vim. I'm just going to do the adds, and then we'll see if there is more compile errors as a result of having made it thread safe. And one of the powerful things is, of course, of this library, thread safe library, that you cannot forget anything. It's just, it won't compile unless you do it the right way. So on highlight and merge, add a script layout. That's the one that it wasn't a vector. That was the last add. Let's see if that was enough or if there was other stuff. Hello, Bastian, by the way, and Hassel. No. There's another problem here. And push constant ranges list is also thread safe, even though only one may have been added, apparently. So yeah, it's oh, I'm calling merge. I see. So I'll just unlock it in line here. You can also do this: push constant range list type, read access type, size. Just a quick unlock and relock. Sorry, quick lock and unlock. Now this is less inefficient than, I guess, locking and unlocking and then locking again in merge and unlocking. That would be maybe less efficient, although it's not very CPU intensive to lock or unlock a mutex when there is only one thread doing it. Hello, Davis. You mean may we be friends? We're all friends here. It's one big family. Okay, I have this. Yeah, so theoretically I would construct a read access object and then use it to access the size, and then pass the read access object to this function to merge instead of unlocking it here and unlocking it again in merge. But one, it's no problem in this case to have a quick unlock and then relock, even though other threads could access it in between. And that won't happen because this function should only be called once everything is quieted down and only one thread is accessing it, namely the pipeline factory. Plus this is debug code, so who cares about inefficiency? In the end it won't be there at all anyway. We're not there yet. No matching function for call to AI thread save access. Here, oh, I guess it must be a C-red. Yeah, this is a const function. So the m push constant ranges list is const, aka the wrapper. So I cannot take a red like I explained before. It must be a C-red. No, it compiles. Okay, now if I look at my own description, as you can see below the video, I'll read it out loud. It says, okay, it works like this. An object of type FlatCreateInfo contains all the data that is needed to create a pipeline. FlatCreateInfo, we just came from there. So there's all these things here. In fact, it does not contain all the data. It contains vectors of pointers to vectors. But okay, if you include those pointers, then it does. Most of the data is dynamic in size and therefore stored in a vector. Well, the exception seems to be this one. This thing, but for the rest everything is a vector. Okay, however, multiple characteristic ranges objects provide this data concurrently. A characteristic range is a task and thus runs potentially in its own thread. Therefore, each characteristic range object declares its own vectors of the data that it is going to provide data to and registers this vector with the FlatCreateInfo object, which merely stores a pointer to that vector. So this is a vector of vectors. Each vector here, each vector pointer, points to a vector provided by a particular characteristic range. So only if our pipeline factory has more than one characteristic range, and these vectors will have more than one pointer stored. Let's have a look at the characteristic range of the window. Let's say user code. Now this one is particularly happy with doing everything. So we are now inside one characteristic. The characteristic is called texture test pipeline. And then, well, this is the characteristic range. It is a characteristic range, but it is just a texture test pipeline characteristic range. And this, well, it's just part of a class. Yeah. This is the class. And derived from characteristic range. As you can see, it provides its own vectors for all those stuff that it wants to fill in order to create a pipeline. And then during initialization, which begins here, it adds pointers to all these vectors, its own vectors. Adds it to the FlatCreateInfo. And this is now thread safe because it will lock a mutex before actually adding it. It is doing more stuff, but this has nothing to do with the FlatCreateInfo. Let's ignore that for a moment. Here's another FlatCreateInfo. There are also things that are not a vector, and these are just accessed directly. I would say that's not thread safe. Indeed, it is not. But well, if another characteristic that you combine this one with would also set the topology, then this is just plain wrong. And I guess I could add debug code to detect if that is the case. But for now, let's put that burden on the coder. You should only have a single characteristic that does this. Okay, and then after this, we do also some initialization here. Add vertex bindings, push constant, pipeline color blend attachment states, stuff. And then we finalize it by a call to this fill. And this was my attempt to get it working with a range of 2. It is after all a characteristic range. And my range value, which is called the fill index here, runs from 0 till 1. So we get here once for 0, and then we get here again for 1. Now let's assume that we get here for the first time, so fill index is 0. Now we can ignore this. And we're just adding a combined image sampler. We only have one of those at the moment. And this is also being added. There's also an add, you know. Is this adding it to our FlatCreateInfo? Not entirely sure. I'm going to skip that. Let's first look at what else happens. At this point, we can preprocess the shaders. It says compile, but that's not true. Preprocess shaders. So we pick which shader code we are going to use here, and then we do preprocessing on it. And preprocess will fill certain things. And we can get back those things by calling these functions. Yeah, I think something is really fishy going on here, because we're just inside one characteristic. The other characteristics might not even have finished yet. And we're already doing pre-processing of shaders. Okay. I mean, can we do that? We could do that if, let's say, this characteristic is responsible for the shaders all on its own. But we can only do pre-processing after we have a certain amount of data, among which this, all the combined image samplers. And not only that, we also need to know, well, okay, the other stuff is here. This must be called, this must be called, this must be called, and this must be called. And then I think we can do the pre-processing. Not sure, I think that's all, yeah. Well, anyway, we already have a problem with this, because I want one characteristic to add one of the combined image samplers, and another characteristic adding a second combined image sampler. And that means that the other characteristic, which runs in parallel, might not have added its combined image sampler yet. So then we start to pre-process it before we even know what to look for. This is telling it what to look for inside the code. So that cannot work. But okay, assume then for a moment that we build in a wait at this point until the other characteristics have added all their combined image samplers. Then we can do the pre-processing. Then still only one characteristic can do the pre-processing. And it's kind of symmetric, right? One of them adds one combined image sampler and the other one adds another combined image sampler. Then which one is going to do the pre-processing? So there's, again, question marks. Is it the correct way to do pre-processing at all in in any given characteristic? And I don't think it is. I probably have to move the pre-processing to the pipeline factory. But that isn't even the current problem. That is, I don't believe it is. There's something going wrong that I'm not really understanding. Namely, there is a failure. Even there is only one characteristic at the moment, so everything I just mentioned doesn't matter. This is the only combined image sampler. It is already added, and why not do the preprocessing here then? And still it fails, and not because this is a range. Not the second time we get here. No, the first time that we get her, it already fails. For fill index 0. So something is really wrong, and I don't understand what. What is going wrong? Well, what is going wrong is that it complains that I added my push constant ranges factor. Yes, we did. This characteristic range, and okay, it's the only one, so still a very simple case. Says to the FlatCreateInfo, I am going to fill this vector. Please remember that you use this vector, merge this vector as soon as you are ready to make the pipeline. And then by the time the pipeline factory is saying, okay, I'm ready, everyone is done, let's create the pipeline, it looks at this vector, of course, and it is empty. And then it says, hey, hola, you said you are going to fill this vector, but it is not filled. So something must be wrong, and it was correct, aka that was an assert. So I debugged it, and it turned out that indeed, at this point, we fill it with nothing. This function returns an empty vector. That's really weird. And before it worked, so I have no idea what is wrong. It must be caused by maybe a call to this clear push constant ranges. I just don't understand exactly how yet. I thought that at least that is the idea, that the call to clear push constant ranges empties the vector that we are going to fill during this preprocess. So I empty it, then I call preprocess, and then it is not empty anymore. So why is it still empty after the preprocess? How can that have anything to do with my call to clear push constant ranges? Okay, let's compile it and run it and see that we indeed get these errors. Okay, let's have a core dump here at this point in merge. And that complains about you called add but never filled the past vector with data. And this is about, it is a merge, so you don't immediately see which vector it is, but by looking at the type T we do know it, and it also prints that because it says it is with T VK push constant range. So it's a vector of push constant ranges. And the size is 0. Why? Well, I don't know. I would say it should be filled in preprocess, but I also said maybe, or it seems to have to do with the fact that I'm calling this. So what happens if I do not call this? And by the way, this is for fill index. This is the first time we get here. I think it prints fill index somewhere. Let me highlight it. Oops. Fill index. There. Fill index is 0. So this is the first time that we execute the first value of the range. It goes wrong immediately. There is no printing of fill index is 1. Okay. Apparently it had nothing to do with that, because it is still failing with the same assert for the same type, because the size is still 0. And hopefully the fill index is also still 0. That means that nothing changed. Yeah, okay, nothing changed. Now, what I think should have happened during preprocess is that it saw this in the code. Detected push constant : X position. Picked it up from the GLSL code, and that should have filled my my vector, I believe. Looking for warnings, what I saw before. Yeah, warnings. Now this is not a push constant. I don't have warnings for push constants, but I do have warnings for vertex data and instance data. And these warnings are like errors, because they are very, very serious. And it says could not find instance data and vertex data. And I think that is the same bug. I mean, if it could not find this, then it could probably also not find the push constants. Except that it didn't complain about that, it just left the vector empty. So why is it not finding this? So here they are, vertex data, colon, etc. in the instance data. And here the other one. They're all there, but apparently could not find it. I think this is, I don't know, I don't understand. I didn't change that much. Certainly not something that has a relationship with this. Maybe this warning, I think the warnings are super related, so I'll just concentrate on that instead. And that happens after entering this. You see the color is purple because it is thread pool 0, 3. The previous line debug output for this thread was this one. And it says entering that function, and then there's an indentation, meaning that we are still inside this function. So I can look at in this function and then find could not find output. I thought I copied the function. I didn't. Oh, yeah, I copied the function name, yeah. And that is defined here. Okay, so we enter here, entering that, and then here it prints could not find. So this is called from the user code when calling vertex input attribute descriptions. Which indeed I think is like immediately so it even happens even before that one. So this returns an empty vector and this returns also an empty vector. And while inside this function it even prints warnings. So might as well look here. Now, let's look at what exactly is going on here. It couldn't find it. How about the locations is empty? I mean, then I wouldn't find it. No, to be sure about that, I'm just going to print always the value of this. So location size. Here's the core dump. I wanted to see the warning. Yeah, size is 0. So could not find, yeah, because there is even nothing. So you're not going to find anything in an empty vector. So locations is empty. In this function. Now, why is locations empty is then the question. This is the shader input data object. And we're talking about this object. Which has a begin refill with was been called, I think. Or I'm not sure actually. It doesn't matter. Even if this was called, that just sets, and that would be this function. So it would do begin refill on locations. Which sets mRefill check container name to true. Which is just a boolean that we have declared together with the container here. And this declares also container name, container type, which is being passed here, container name. So it declares locations of locations container type. And if we call locations here, we got an empty vector, and that is m_location. So that was the thing that is declared here, and that's empty. Now, I would say either it remained empty or it was reset. I would say that it is filled by calls to update location. I also have a clear locations. That would clear it. And that's code that I wrote recently, not the update location. So I have the feeling that we get here after calls to update location, before the moment that we try to search it. So I put debug code, debug output in both. We already have it here with this pointer. And then I'm going to add output here. And we are adding output here, so I can see that it is, which this pointer is being, which object is being used to get that empty vector. Yes, this is the first warning, 94%. It's not the first warning, but that's not interesting. Pipeline not available. Yeah. Okay, so warning, we cannot find stuff, and that is apparently, what the hell is it printing this twice? Locations is called twice. Why on earth? As soon as I see anything that I don't understand, I have to look into it. I drop everything and I look into what I last saw that I did not understand. Because, well, it's not good not understanding anything. It could be a bug. And if it doesn't, then it's definitely inefficient. Right. It's calling locations because we want to find something, and then it's calling it again to get end. Oh, how inefficient. Well, maybe not. We're just returning a reference, or what are we returning here? Yeah, it's just this returns a reference, so I guess it's okay. But apparently that's why. Okay. So they continue and then we stop again, and now it's in the end. So I wrote that to the file, and now we have cannot find instance and position because it is empty, of course. And that is that object. Gotta be kidding me. Well, looks like clear is never called, but also update is not called. And wasn't it called update locations? It's not called at all. Okay, well, that's why it is empty then. Or maybe it is update location that I should have looked at. Update location. Called from here. It's printed here. Update location. Yeah. Got to look at that. Also not called. I'm glad. We're calling never update location, which means we never get here. GLSL ID full is used in. It's not being called. Push constant declaration context, that would call it. That's a push constant. Vertex attribute declaration context. Because that's what we're looking at. And then I have more push constant stuff in here. Vertex attribute. That's a declaration. Another definitions and declarations. I'm still ignoring the push constants, and that is the line that we're never getting to, apparently. That means that this is never called, right? And it isn't. Why? Okay, this is never called. Is used in. Is this the only bloody place where is used in is called? The rest are declarations and debug output. So that seems to be the case. So we would never get here. Okay. Why not? Well, most likely reason would be because that is empty. So I can just go ahead and test it. Twice you get there and the size is just 1, which is almost empty. Well, this is called on the fragment shader GLSL code, and then the only double columns that we have. I mean, this is commented out, but I think I'm guessing I'm not even adding it, so we would just be looking for this. So I think the size is 1 is looking for that, and I might find it because I don't know. But it's not looking for anything else, which is not the problem because there is nothing else. This is the only one with the double column in it. However, the things that we are missing are in the vertex shader. I thought that was printed as well. Here's the vertex shader. Loads of stuff. Preprocess 1, code is printed. Calling prepare shader resource declarations. Combined and entering indentation. Prepare shader resource declarations. And then when you get back from that, the print size is 1. Oh. What? Okay, that is a different thing then. And then indentation is decreased. So this one here is inside preprocessing this one, which should be way more. Not one, but a lot more. So maybe I should start with printing what is in it then, because it should have been like 5, or how many do I have? 4. And then we enter again, and now we enter for the fragment shader, and now it makes sense that we have only 1. Definitely want to see how many we have. Well, lens. Maybe it's time to use libcwd and add a lot of debug output to your program. Yeah, in both cases. It's in both cases looking for combined image sample top. That is not what we want. Well, we want it in this case, but we do not want it in that case. Where did all the other things go? Like that one and that one. It was erased. Yep, I get it. The bug has been solved. Window.h. It's the other one. How boring. Clear shader variables. So I'm clearing all the shader variables that he added above, and then I add just one combined image sampler. Back. Nope, not good. Okay. Now we cannot do that because we did add stuff here. And that's during the initialization, so we should not clear that. At least not all of it. Yes, because what we should do is remember what is in the vector before the fill, and then the next fill reset the vector to what it was before the previous fill, okay, at the end of initialization. Lulu asks exactly at the moment that I'm done fixing my bug, so that's a really good moment to ask me something. Could you explain what is important if you program object-oriented? Let me think. So the reason that you, yes, the reason that you program object-oriented is so that you separate, if that's the right word, different parts of the code, so that those parts become self-containing, as it were. So let's say your objects do not communicate at all. So just completely isolated objects. And you have 100 of them. Now you have a big program consisting of 100 objects, but you only have to concentrate on one object at a time because it's not doing anything with the rest. It's just completely on its own. So you have only to look at 1% of your code while trying to make it working. Yes, and that is basically the reason that you code object-oriented, because you can have an overview. So every object must be so small that you can have an overview of it. Now, what is an object? An object is a wrapper, or class is a wrapper around data. Could be multiple member variables. Each member variables could be a built-in type or a standard library type, like a standard string or a standard vector, which then again, template types can, of course, then, like a standard vector, can store other types, which then again can be built-in types, or well, any other types from the standard library, or built-in, or custom types, of course. So, and custom type is then an object, a class. So it's a class of its own. But you could have, say, a class A that contains some variables and also a standard vector of class B. And then B is self-contained, as it were, and A assumes that B works. You may assume that B is completely bug-free while working on the code of A. So it's still a little bit smaller. You do not have to take all of the code of B into account. Anyway, all these variables, sorry, all these variables that you have wrapped, and they should be private, so nobody else can touch it except the functions of the class itself. They contain a state. And that means you need a certain amount of memory to store one instance of the class, so one object. And there might exist of pointers to heap allocations, like in the case of a standard vector, which then is not part of the size of the object, but it does belong to the state of the object. As long as nobody else can access the vector, then what the vector stores kind of belongs to the responsibility of the class that contains the vector, all right? Even though it is not all in the same memory. So all this memory then that contains, that is contained, or is for which this class is responsible, can have random values, theoretically. Well, not entirely, because also a standard vector is an object. Well, I'll get to that. So forget the standard strings and the standard vectors and the standard whatever. Just use the POD objects of built-in types for this example. Then you could fill all that memory with random data. And every different bit pattern gives you a different state. However, not every bit pattern is legal or useful or even within the program definitions meaningful. Is Lulu still here? Because I see a message retracted. I guess it is. See here. Yeah, so Lulu, so you can see every class as or every object as a container of state data, but not all the state data is, let's say, consistent with, with how it should be, what it should be. No, I didn't use the word speed at all. The point is that the total state space of what you can store in a given object is usually much larger than the state space that is what you can call consistent. And then the idea is that all the non-const member functions can be seen as operators that operate on your state. And then the state must be consistent before you call those functions. And the state must be consistent again at the moment you leave those functions. Of course, you cannot have two threads at the same time calling member functions, because then it could be that your functions assume that the state is consistent, but it can be temporarily inconsistent at the moment that you call a function while it is running, a member function. So if you call two member functions at the same time, then it usually goes wrong. Not even, not just because you might be writing to a memory location that the other one is reading from. Let's say if all the members are atomic, then that would not be a problem. but you still don't know if the state that you're working with is consistent. I probably explain this really bad. I don't know. Okay, I could say we have maybe I should type it in. To make it a little bit more clear. So we have a class, and we have variables. Variables, I want the variables always to be private. So now the state space here is two-dimensional. You know what R is? State space is R2. Yeah, there's infinite numbers. X can have any value between minus infinity and plus infinity, and Y can also have any value between minus infinity and plus infinity. So you have the product of all of R is the real numbers, so real numbers squared. However, if this is, say, a dartboard position, and the dartboard is a circle with a radius of 1, then you're not in the dartboard if you miss the dartboard. So for a start, this sits in a range between -1 and 1. And this sits in a range between -1 and 1. But that's even just for one float. So suddenly -2 is not going to happen. That's not part of the consistent state. Every dartboard position will be between -1 and 1. Otherwise you're off the dartboard. And the same for the Y coordinate. You know, where 0, 0 is the center of the bullseye. But it's more dramatic. There is even a correlation between X and Y. It must be the case that X squared, I can type, X squared plus Y squared is less than or equal 1. In other words, X is allowed to be 1, but if it is 1, then Y must be 0. Otherwise, you're still outside of the dartboard. So you see the consistent state, as in the values of X and Y, are a lot more limited than what you actually could put in the memory locations of them. X provides a memory location that allows storing -infinity till plus infinity, and Y too. But the dartboard position requires that both X and Y are between -1 and 1, and that this holds, that X squared plus Y squared is at all times less than or equal 1. So the consistent state space, say, is this demand. And if then you have a function, any member function that is not const, of course you can have accessors if there are const, so you can just say, I want to access X. There's a const member function. You can do whatever you want. You can return X here. Well, let's call it mx, because I called my function X now. Now we can have an access of Y. That's all nice and dandy. But you also have non-const functions. For example, well, you want your state to let's say we allow to rotate the position. So I have a function, and that is called rotate float theta. That's going to change both X and Y, because you want to rotate the thing over an angle theta. And doing calculation, and then it's going to do mx is the new value and my is the new value. It cannot write to mx and my at exactly the same time. That's not possible. Well, you could do that if you were able to store it in a single atomic and then prepare the atomic and then write mx and my at the same time by writing a single atomic. But if they're different floats, then it is just not. You're not going to write it them at exactly the same time, and therefore you will be updating mx before you update my, or the other way around, with a new value. So it can happen that as a result of the rotation, after assigning mx but not yet assigning my, that this does no longer hold. Because due to the rotation, x could be larger and you were already on the edge. Well, then you get outside of the board, so this is no longer holding then. But then you assign my, and then it is again consistent. Then you are inside the board again. It's just very short time, it's not consistent. Now that is allowed to happen during the call of a function. But you can assume that this holds before you call the function, and it must of course hold at the moment you leave the function again. And you can see these things as operators. So all your functions, all the mapper functions of your objects are operators that may assume certain, how do you call these things? Premises, or and then they can work with that, and then they must guarantee that, well, at least if the premises is true at the moment you call them, that it is again true when you leave the function. And then from the outside, you no longer have to make sure that the premises are guarded. You know, the object itself is taking responsibility for that. If you take any dot position object, you just know that this is holding, and you know that as long as you call one member function at a time, don't call two member functions at the same time with two different threads. That is, if you just call one thread calls one function, that when it leaves, it's again true. So you have no worry anymore to keep certain things true. So you get something that is more powerful. And then you can start to see those objects as building blocks. Because having building blocks like these classes, you can build another class that uses custom classes that you already wrote. Building on the fact that those classes protect, certain premises. Do I pronounce that right? Someone who's English? The Discord is very, very dead-ish. I mean, I can give it to you, but usually nobody's talking, so I don't think it's a really good place to ask questions. You see, someone has actually been talking to me on Discord. I only see that now. Okay, anyway, I'll give you the invite. Currently, that's the invite. And someone asked a while ago, please, does someone know which desktop environment Carlo is using? And nobody answered him. So That's basically, you know, how it works there. You can ask a question, but it's the wrong place to ask. Okay, he asked questions very specifically at me, so I'm going to answer him. I think what he wants to know is post image. I don't want to post an image. I want to click on repositories and this. So let's do a reply. I'm typing him back. I'm using Arch and console with a K with the above true color scheme and font. What is my font? I guess the font is still the same. Appearance, deja vu. Cannot copy that. Deja vu son mono 16 point for YouTube. Yeah, hello syntax. Oh, I'm typing at bear, but it's not your name. What is your name in what is your name in Discord, bear? Yeah, I just typed into bear as well. You can, per Discord server, change your nick. Just maybe easiest to change in Discord the name to what you are using in on YouTube. I'm going to just in the click on your name or right click on your name. Okay, I don't know anymore how that works, but definitely worked for me. Let's see how I can change my nick here. I don't know. Okay. LGL, yes, it's mine. Ah, yes, Bear just changed it. So now it's clear who Bear is. Okay. Yeah, I feel like taking a break. I don't know why, because we're not done yet, right? As in totally not. But I'm getting old, I think. That must be it. So the last thing I did was remove this clear, and now it should work again. But then the second time we get here, we have a problem. Fixing this is not easy. I think I just have to think about it again. There's LGL. He just has his neck right from the start. LGL is the man, or I hope you are. Otherwise, you know, people get all upset. Are you the man, LGL, or does LGL stand for lesbian, gay? Yeah, it's the last L. I don't know. That was nonsense, actually. Because you can... Well, let's not get into this incredibly sensitive politic topic. Okay, yeah, TT. Cordump. So now it's complaining about shader variables not being empty. The second fail. What? I was so sure that it was the second fail. This is the first fail. How is that possible? What the hell? Well, I'm definitely sort of part of that ish, I guess. But this was about gender, not about sexuality. That's why my remark was nonsense. I think we lost syntax on YouTube because it totally moved to... syntax is sending me private messages in Discord, but that's not working, really. I'm not... No. If you join the Discord server, then... post it in the on the server, not in private. Right, yeah. I also found people to, on Discord, ask if I'm there, and then if I'm not there, then they don't ask that question. That also doesn't work. Because I'm always busy. I seldom look at it. So, yeah, if you ask a question, it's going to take a few hours before I react. And if you don't ask a question, then, yeah, well, then there's nothing to answer. So it's better to just ask a question and then wait several hours and then maybe I'll answer it. If I feel like it. Oh, you cannot. Okay, let me look into that. I think I turned that off to stop any potential spamming, but I can turn it on for anyone who asks, because they are not spammers if they ask me. But how does that work? I can add a role, so I need a role. I guess I need a role. Server settings in one pro setting, edit server profile. Which one is it? Server settings or edit server profile? Server settings, I guess. Roles. Default create a role. Okay, I'm creating a role as in can post links. But that I don't want to have that in the role. Just called trusted. Create role trusted. And then that disappeared. New role. It's called new role. I called it trust. I'm just gonna call it trusted twice. Trusted. Permissions for the new role, view channels, manage roles, manage webhooks, manage server, create invite, change nickname, manage nicknames, kick members, ban members, timeout members, send messages in thread, create public thread, create private checks, embed links. Allows links that members share to show embedded content in text channels. Okay, that's done on. Attach files. Allow members to upload files. Oh, that's a bit too much. Not really necessary, I think. Use external emo. No. Use external stickers. No. Mention everyone. No. Not that trusted. Manage messages. Allow members to delete messages by other members. No. Manage threads. Allow members to rename deletable threads. Send text-to-speech messages. I think it's just the only one. Allow members to share the video screen. Nah. Not yet. Right, I think this worked. Now we have a trusted role. Click on here, role, trusted. Now, LGL is trusted, of course. And bear is trusted. I forgot who anyone else was, but if you want to be able to post links in Discord, then ask me, and I'll give you the trusted role. Oh, Hamke is there too. Okay, but in the meantime, I'm going to stop the stream, okay, for a break and stuff.